All right, so welcome to the 7th class using Brother Tio's notes, class notes. Continuing on from the last class in which we went into a lot of detail on the insight knowledges, today continue saying the characteristics of existence that can be penetrated by study-pariyatti of the Buddhist doctrines, which is the Dhammā, practice, paṭipatti, or morality, sīla, and realization, paṭivedha, of the truth of life through meditation. Thus, you discover that Buddhism has a single taste, the taste of liberation. In other words, everything focuses on liberation. This sequence of pariyatti, paṭipatti, paṭivedha comes from the sub-commentaries. You won't find it in the suttas. It is or even in the commentary, but the structure comes from the sub-commentaries, a way of approaching our practice. We start by studying, then we practice, and then through practice, only through practice do we realize the Dhammā. Study cannot lead to realization just by itself. There needs to be a practice element in there. I'm going to use an analogy here to kind of illustrate this, preparing a meal. Analogy of preparing a meal. So pariyatti is learning the recipe. This is where you study the ingredients, the cooking techniques, step-by-step instructions. You read cookbooks, watch expert chefs, memorize the principles of cooking, watch YouTube, study how you're going to make this particular dish. In the Dhammā, this is the theoretical understanding of the Buddha's teachings, which means reading the suttas, studying the Abhidhamma, listening to Dhamma talks, attending classes like this, gaining an intellectual thinking knowledge of the path. The limitation of pariyatti, the first step, is that no matter how much you study, you won't taste the food until you start cooking. This is still just theory. You're still in the theory stage. Next stage is cooking. Now you go into the kitchen, you start to apply what you've learned, and chop up the vegetables, adjust the heat, follow the steps with mindfulness. Yeah, mistakes happen, sometimes just problems, but through practice you refine your skills. This is the practice stage, paṭipatti. In Dhammā, this is the practice of sīla, samadhi, and paññā. This is meditation practice. This is the practice of offering dana, keeping precepts, taking the refuges, meditation. All of this is under practice. Mindfulness and mindful living. The limitation of practice is that just simply cooking isn't enough. You need to taste and really experience the final result. You haven't yet experienced the result. Finally, paṭivedha. Now you take a bite. Now you truly know what the dish tastes like, not just in theory, but through direct experience. It's no longer an idea, it's a reality. So in Dhammā, paṭivedha is the direct realization, the deep insight into the nature of reality, into anicca, dukkha, anatta, all those insight knowledges I talked about in the last class. The moment of awakening where anicca, dukkha, and anatta are fully seen, not as concepts, but as lived experiences. So all that stuff I talked about in the last class, all those concepts of the different insight knowledges and nature of the object at each, looking at each stage of insight knowledge, it actually goes from words to in your heart type of experience. Now, this is one way of looking at it as a menu or eating, but I personally feel a better way of looking at it is visualizing a trail through a forest to a mountain. This is a spiritual journey, thinking about our spiritual journey using the analogy of a physical journey. Pariyatti is studying the map, learning about the trail, where it starts, where it ends, what landmarks to expect, what dangers to avoid, what equipment is needed. Now, you haven't started walking yet. You're just preparing yourself, making sure you got all the tools, got all the equipment, you know what to expect, This is the beginning of the journey. Before you even start on the physical journey, this is all the preparation that study gives you. In practice, paṭipatti is actually walking the path through the forest, applying what you've learned, using your compass. Compass, remember, is right view, looking at the right, going the right direction, dealing with obstacles, the hindrances. Actually, in meditation, hindrances such as sensual desire or aversion, sloth and torpor, restlessness and worry, doubt, all of these come up. You got to deal with it. Staying alert, correcting your direction when you stray. Now you're on the real terrain. You're making effort, mindfulness, and wisdom. These are the three components, most important components of practice: effort, mindfulness, and wisdom. This brings you through the journey until paṭivedha is reaching the mountain peak. You see, once you're on top of the mountain peak, you can look back and get a panoramic view and truly understand, not just trusting the map or the descriptions, directly knowing the truth through personal realization, beyond concept, beyond belief. This is the pinnacle of the journey. The purpose of the whole journey is reaching the end of the mountain. Another way of looking at this progression of study, practice, and realization, pariyatti, paṭipatti, paṭivedha, is jumping a stream. So before you even study, there can be blind faith. I believe I can jump this stream. You convince yourself, I haven't done anything yet, but I am in my heart, yes, I believe I can do it. This blind faith happens before you study. The next stage of pariyatti, there is reasoned faith. In other words, I have studied how to do stream jumping. I have learned all the techniques, all the practices, how to do stream jumping. With paṭipatti, there is experiential faith. I have practiced jumping on my side of the stream. I've been running, jumping, and practicing, making sure I know how to get my footing right, how to launch off and make sure that I land properly. All of these practice, it gives one experience. We're still at the practice stage. For paṭivedha, there is unshakable faith. Once someone has already jumped over the stream, the whole question of I can jump over the stream is obvious. It's a tautology. And you can say, of course I can jump over the stream. I've done it. There's no question. There is no question of belief. It is an unshakable confidence that it has already, because it has already happened. So when a person experiences nibbana for the first time, that moment becomes that they have become a sotapanna. That experience of jumping over the stream is so deep and so fundamental, so transformative. It means that wrong view can no longer happen. It can't happen anymore. It's not even possible because there has been the direct personal experience. So I'm going to relate this to my own personal experience, my own personal journey. When I was a teenager, I studied philosophy. I became interested in philosophy. And so I asked a friend of mine, if I want to study philosophy, who should I start with? They said, do you want to go back to the Greeks or do you want to start with modern? I said, oh, let's just modern. So he said, Descartes, René Descartes. Now, so I started reading René Descartes as a teenager, and it was logical. He based his approach on pure logic. And with logic, it was like a mathematical precision where you start with a set of assumptions that are unquestioned, and then you built up using logical step by step to come to more elaborate, build up your whole elaborate system based on assumptions and then solid logic. And the logic was so beautiful, so detailed, so intricate. But the most fundamental assumption that he made was in French, je pense donc je suis, in Latin, cognito ergo sum, in English, I think, therefore I am. And he said that is the one thing that is unquestioned. I think, therefore I am. And he built up using all this beautiful logic. He built up a proof of the existence of God based on this, an ontological proof of the existence of God. He did this whole based on purely on logic, not based on any experience, but based purely on logic. And I was just so impressed. Then my friend said, okay, you've read Descartes, now I want you to read Kant, Immanuel Kant. So Immanuel Kant also applied logic, but in a slightly different way, showed all the logical failings of Descartes and showed a whole different logical system coming to a different set of conclusions. I went back, I said, oh yeah, Kant saw all the mistakes that Descartes made. That was great. Then my friend said, now read Leibniz, Berkeley, Hume. And I started reading philosopher after philosopher after philosopher. And each one of them used logic to disprove the earlier ones. After reading 6 or 7 different philosophers, they could never agree. And I was deeply, fundamentally upset. I said, these are the greatest minds that the Western world has ever created, and they can't agree. So either there is no answer to these kinds of questions. It's all just a waste of time. Or they all made a wrong step just out of the gate, and they're all wandering around in left field. They're all lost. My personal belief was that there is an answer, that all of these Western philosophers had made some kind of mistake, some fundamental mistake somewhere. And so I spent 5 years coming up with my own set of beliefs, just doing a lot of deep internal reflection, saying, what do I believe? What makes sense to me? And I started really reflecting on this and building until finally one day, when I was 19, my girlfriend's father, who happened to be a Christian minister, asked me about my religious beliefs. I said, well, I was born, raised in a Christian family, but I kind of left the path. He asked me to explain. I spent 3 hours going into all the detail of everything that I'd come up with. And this Christian minister said, what you describe is very close to Buddhism. And I said, no. It cannot be. I cannot believe that independently I came up with one of the world's great religions. He said, go read a book on Buddhism. So I went to the library, this is way before the internet. So I went to the library and I started studying the Dhammā, and I became passionate. This went on for 20 years, studying the Dhammā in detail because it aligned with what I had come up with. Then that is the study stage. Then that led to, the study stage led to practicing vipassana meditation. You know, before I retired from my day job, I'm working, and so I'd come back and I'd teach Abhidhamma on the weekends, did that for 15 years. But at the end of the day, I just didn't have enough time in my schedule to do retreats, serious retreats. You know, a couple of 2-week retreats a year, that's all I could fit in with my vacation schedule. Once I retired, I said, all right, I want to, like 10 years ago, I said, now I want to really focus my time on meditation. And so I gave up teaching this class and spent a lot of time doing meditation, almost half of my time for the next 10 years doing deep meditation. So that's when I really started vipassana meditation. So now what you will see is that I'm combining the meditation experience with my Abhidhamma knowledge and giving you a perspective on Abhidhamma from the perspective of a vipassana meditator. A lot of the stuff I talk about is from the perspective of a vipassana meditator. So that's my personal journey. You notice I haven't colored in realization yet because I don't want to I can't claim any realization. I've not reached Sotapanna stage yet. But along the vipassana experiences that I have of anicca, dukkha, anatta, the insight knowledges have just reinforced and reconfirmed to me personally that I'm on a right path. It makes sense to me, and what makes sense to me matches what's in my heart, in what's in my experience. Now, making sense and what's in your experience is very important. The brain, I think, as we know, has the two sides, the left side of the brain, the right side of the brain. The left side of the brain is logical, analysis, thinking. The right side of the brain is more emotional, feeling, experiencing. And they work differently, but it's still the same brain, but it works differently. This is a bit of a simplification, but when I was working, I would run workshops with groups of people from the government or from large organizations, and I would first ask them, okay, what are your priorities on this axis and this axis? And let's place your priorities on a scale of how important these things are to you and how effective you are at doing them. And so they would place them on a scale. And placing on a scale, a two-dimensional scale, requires logical thinking. So after all this, I'd come back and say, okay, based on where you place things, the things that are most important to you that you're currently least effective at, those should be your top priorities, right? From a logical point of view, those are the top priorities. And then separately, I gave them the same list, and I said, vote for your top 5. And the top 5 that they would vote didn't match, according to the votes on the priorities, didn't match. What that shows is that the way in which the left brain works, which is logical, and the way in which the right brain works, which is emotional and voting, don't match. And this is why, by the way, politicians who want your vote focus on emotional topics. Rational stuff like debates, what happens during the debate has very little influence on how the final vote goes. It's the emotional stuff. And so that's why politicians behave the way they do. They pick emotional topics to get you to vote for them. Not rational, not the thinking or the tax implications, or all those rational things. Similarly, when going through, you start with a study of the Dhammā. This is rational. This is thinking. This is analysis. That works great with the left side of the brain. But when what is experienced during Vipassana meditation, it's not rational. It is outside of rational. It's the direct experience of, wow, this is anicca. The object really is disappearing in front of me. Or there really is a fundamental feeling of dissatisfaction with everything. There's no foundation, no foothold, nothing to support me. This is dukkha. There is this experience of anatta that there's nothing I can do. I just have to stand back and watch as all this stuff happens. There's no control. And everything is happening naturally because of causes. So these experiences, even though I read about them for years, they are deep, visceral, gut level experiences that match. Then you go, oh, that's what the Buddha was talking about. That's what the sutras are talking about. That's what the meditation teacher is guiding me toward. Okay? So very important that this is going from the left side, the logical side of the brain, studying the Dhammā, to the emotional side of the brain, practicing Vipassana meditation. So before I go on to the next topic, any questions on pariyatti, paṭipatti, paṭivedha? Any questions on what I've just been discussing here? Just want to check it online. You can hear me?
Yes, bro.
Okay. So if there's no questions on this, the progression, pariyatti, paṭipatti, we're going to go to the next section in Brother Tio's notes. The life of Buddha Gautama. Okay, this is a whole chapter, next chapter in Brother Tio's notes. His class notes included 3 pages. I spent so long going over the 3 pages of class notes, saying, where did this come from? Where did that come from? Trying to source that. Is that from a sutta? Is that from a commentary? Is that from the Vinaya? Where did it come from? And then I got a little bit frustrated. I said, why am I doing all this? How is this going to help anybody's practice? This is just an academic research. So his class notes include 3 pages of details regarding Buddha's birth, enlightenment, the first Dhamma discourse, and the paṭivedha. Almost everything from Brother Teo's notes are taken from the commentaries or later sources, not from the suttas. So the stuff that you get taught in Sunday school or the stuff that you taught yourself in Sunday school is not from the suttas. Almost none of it is from the suttas. Almost all of it is created later. And there's a reason for that. Over the decades, I've done many hundreds of hours of Dhamma talks. If somehow you were to have a recording of every Dhamma talk I'd ever given, and you were to analyze every Dhamma talk I'd ever given, and you were to listen to it again and again, would you be able to write a biography of my life? No, right? Because my purpose in sharing the Dhamma, there's no reason to talk about all of my personal history. The same with the Buddha. He almost never talked about his childhood. I mean, just very, very briefly. And everything that was added, but people still want to know about this biography of the Buddha, the life of the Buddha. So it's added in by commentators, storytellers later on, not from the suttas. I'll give you one example. The Buddha only mentions his father twice in all the suttas, briefly. In one sutta, he said, my father was King Sudan. And in fact, right? And my mother was Maya. This is when he was talking about past Buddhas and so on. And then another time, he briefly mentioned his father and used the word King Sudan. And he used the word king, Raja, in Pali. However, the Sakyas were not a kingdom. Right? I mean, they didn't have a monarchy like in the traditional sense. They were a republic. So the word Raja in this context doesn't mean king, even though it's been translated as king. It's more like a chieftain, an elected official or somebody highly respected. I mean, a boss, but not somebody who has absolute power and their kingdom goes down to their child. There were kingdoms, but the Sakyas were not a kingdom. So Gautama was not a prince in the traditional sense. He was the son of a chieftain. That's just one small example. Another example, 2 weeks ago we had Waisak. Actually, Waisak was not mentioned in the suttas. The date of when the Buddha was born, became enlightened, parinibbana, no indication of date from the suttas. It was in 67 AD, 500 years after the Buddha, that some Sri Lankan king said, okay, we're going to take the full moon day on the 5th month, which is called Vaisakha. We're going to make it a public holiday. So he declared, we're going to pick this day and make it a public holiday in which we honor or commemorate the Buddha's birth, enlightenment, and parinibbana. And it's been handed down since then. So it was some king 2,000 years ago that declared a public holiday. And that's where we get Vaisakha. Not from the suttas, not even from the commentaries. This was a relatively modern invention. Okay, so a lot of the stuff that you hear about the life of the Buddha was not based on the suttas. It was added in later. The way in which Brother Teo organized the life of the Buddha was according to 4 events, and where the Buddha was born, the time where he was born, enlightenment, the first setting the wheel of motion of Dhamma in place, and attaining Nibbana. And these 4 places are mentioned in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta as, according to the Sutta, these are places where the Buddha said the faithful should go. Faithful monks and nuns, male and female lay followers, visit these places. And any who die while making this pilgrimage to these shrines with a devout heart will, at breaking for the body after death, be reborn in the heavenly world. So these 4 locations become the pilgrimage sites for Buddhists. All of them are, Lee is in Nepal, and the other 3 are in northern India, northeastern India. Right? And the Buddha highlighted those 4 locations as pilgrimage sites. Lumbini, Bodh Gaya, Isiptana, the Deer Garden, and Wisconsin. Now, I've been on a pilgrimage, went to these 4 sites. I want to share with you the impact that each of these sites had on me personally and the relevance of them. Lumbini symbolizes the preciousness of human rebirth, being born as a human with the potential to attain nibbana. When I visited Lumbini, what was in my heart in seeing the Mayadevi temple and seeing the tree and the bathing pool was this symbolizes that the Buddha was born as a human, and I too was born as a human. The Buddha was able to, even with his human birth, through effort and wisdom, was able to attain enlightenment. So I too have that potential. It is the humanness. And there is a sutta where it talks about the Buddha being born and taking 7 steps and saying, this is my last birth. To me, in my heart, that's a later addition. I view the Buddha as being born as a regular person. Nothing, not divine, as a regular person who through his own effort, through his own wisdom, attained enlightenment. So the human rebirth was important to me. At Bodh Gaya, sitting underneath that Bodhi tree, underneath the Bodhi tree. In fact, I got a little tent and meditated the night under the Bodhi tree. Spent the night under the Bodhi tree in a tent. To me, that was what symbolized to me was the realization of the truth through vipassana. How did the Buddha become enlightened? Through vipassana. He was meditating on the Four Noble Truths, meditating on dependent origination. This is what led the Buddha through energy, mindfulness, concentration, panya, wisdom, led to enlightenment. And he faced a lot of challenges. It talks about how the armies of Mara, all these internal armies, attacked the Buddha to try and distract the Buddha from his journey to enlightenment. And not through violence or crushing his teeth or crushing those enemies did the Buddha win. It was simply by standing his ground through energy, mindfulness, concentration, and panya. That's how the Buddha conquered all those internal challenges. When Mara approached him and said, hey, what gives you the right to be a Buddha? The Buddha pointed to the ground with his right hand to say the earth is witness to my energy, mindfulness, concentration, and panya. That is what that symbolizes Bodh Gaya, is that to me it was vipassana. Isipatana, this symbolized to me when I visited this very beautiful park in his first sermon, where he talked about the Four Noble Truths, the Noble Eightfold Path. This is the core of the Buddha's teaching, the Four Noble Truths, the Noble Eightfold Path. This is the Dhammā. They encapsulate all of the Dhammā in the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Noble Path. Everything else is kind of like an expansion upon that, in my opinion. So the core essence of the Dhammā in that first sermon, this is the Buddha's Dhammā that was shared. The second thing that I always thought about when visiting this is where the Sangha was formed, right? This is where those 5 ascetics became followers of the Buddha, became the root, the core monks of the Buddha's. They became arhats, and the Mahasangha became also the Aryan Sangha was formed here. To me, the Sangha, they are an inspiration. I think about the Sangha here, the formation of Sangha. Those are the people who inspire me. They are my Kalyana Mita. They're the ones that guide me, right? They're the ones who for 500 years were propagating or were the storehouse of the Dhammā and propagated the Dhammā and shared the Dhammā with lay people. Even to today, they share with lay people. And they are what they call in the suttas a field of merit, an opportunity to perform merit by making offerings of food and robes to the Buddha or to the Sangha. So these are the formation of the Sangha was also very much on my mind when visiting Abhidhamma. And Kusinara, this, where the Buddha passed away, to me, I reflected on the universality of anicca. Even the Buddha is subject to this natural law. The mortality of the Buddha comes through. You think, all right, he was born as a human, he died, just like all humans will die. Or sorry, not just like all humans will die. He attained paṭivedha, but it had to end. Everything, even the Buddha, was subject to anicca. His last words, Abhidhamma sankara, dhammā sankara, all conditioned things are subject to decay, started on with heedfulness. The last words of the Buddha gave encouragement to continue on. Also, I think about through practice. Yes, not just me, everything is subject to impermanence. Strive on with heedfulness. Be mindful in your practice and make the effort. So effort and mindfulness come through again in that manner. So in summary, during that whole trip, which was very spiritually inspiring, there was the recognition of the potential for awakening, even though I'm a human. Bodhgaya, the ethics and wisdom to attain awakening, learning and preserving the teaching, embrace impermanence and strive for liberation. So what I've done is I've taken Brother Teal's 3 pages of notes that are taken primarily from the commentary and kind of summarized my personal feelings about those 4 locations, Kumbini, Bodhgaya, Bhāvanā, and Kusinara, which Brother Teal went into all of the commentary of stories. I gave my personal experience. So any questions or comments on that? Yeah.
Actually, this is my personality. Just actually very, how can I say that? Doesn't feel very easy with these stories. There was one, took 7 steps from
Streams from the Devas, yeah.
It's all very mystical kind of stuff. You get what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like at the same time, I'm a Buddhist, they are talking about the world, but at the same time, it doesn't make sense,
Okay.
All these kind of things, like who recorded, who witnesses all these kind of things.
I agree with you 100%. Let's just talk about devas in general, because there's devas in many sutras. They talk about devas, right? Are there really devas? What if there were no devas? Would it make any difference to the Four Noble Truths, the Noble Eightfold Path, the practice of vipassana? Absolutely not. It doesn't change anything. If somewhere along the line the storytellers embellished the basic message of the Buddha to add in devas to make it more attractive. Now, the king of the devas, Saka, right? That happened to be the king of the devas in the Vedic tradition, right? So they borrowed a lot of stuff from the Vedic tradition, which eventually became Hindu. They borrowed a lot of stuff from that and kind of took it into embellishments to the Buddha's teaching. The Jataka tales, right? Yeah. You got talking animals and so on, right? Many of those Jataka tales predate the Buddha, meaning they were recorded down in Vedic tradition. Virtually the same story. But then when they became Buddhists, they just added in, oh, the monkey was the Buddha, the monkey god was the Buddha, and then this one was Sariputta, and that one was, this animal was bhāvanā, whatever. They just kind of adapted it. But it doesn't change. To me, I 100% believe that there's been distortions, even to the suttas, over time. Embellishments. I shouldn't say distortions. The message is the same. So when I read the story of the Buddha's birth, the small little section that talks about that from the suttas, thinking 7 steps and then the streams and so on. I push that aside because it doesn't change the fundamental belief that the Buddha was born as a human and I too have the potential for awakening. I can put that aside. It doesn't hurt me at all to ignore all these different realms of existence and the devas as an example.
What is the practice of Buddhism is like based on reality, on the observation of reality. And then your current, the birth of the Buddha with all these fanciful, difficult things. It's not like it's not very appropriate in your life. Because I feel very uncomfortable. It's like when I learn more and that's like all the teaching is always about to observe, what is reality. I think you don't pay attention to all these things. But then when it's come to the birth of the Buddha, everything is like, oh, this is all totally, not okay. Doesn't jive.
I agree with you.
That's why I feel very uncomfortable. Why you keep on repeating this kind of story?
In the suttas, there are a little bit of this embellishment. You get to the commentaries, there's a lot. Commentaries have a lot of this embellishment. To me, I just like you, what is the message? Okay? 4 Noble Truths, 8-Fold Noble Path, the stuff directly linked to those. Those are the teachings of the Buddha. Those are the message of the Buddha. The rest of it is decoration. That can put aside.
My comment is that it depends on the different level of people. So this is like a form of packaging, in the sense that for those who start learning the religion, they have to have something, isn't it, like the children, like this. So these are the stories that created them to make them interested. Then as they learn further, they start to filter what is right, what is wrong.
Agree.
But the only thing is that I believe that in the initial stage, the Sunday school, they mustn't teach in such a way to tell them this is true, between the comma. You're just telling them, okay, this is what has been stated in the commentary, and don't comment too much. Right? As they learn, they start to filter. So there is a reason why, let's say, for example, the brother, you have reached to a certain level that brother talk, then you start to filter.
Yeah.
So this is inevitable. You need it. For marketing to sell the product, you need the advertising, whether you can keep the more, especially for children.
Yes.
If you don't have this, you talk about all the way through, talk about meditation, you don't buy. I think that is I think it's the perspective.
I would agree. I mean, Jataka tales are primarily Sunday school, right? Because each Jataka tale teaches a small little moral lesson. And those moral lessons initially were aimed at children. And so they put talking animals and so on to make them interesting for children.
Everything has its place.
Everything has its place.
For certain level, for certain.
That's right. And also you got to remember the culture has changed a lot. 500 years.
Like you say, why do you have to repeat 3 times, because the Indian culture is that you have to repeat 3 times, for the Europeans it's a waste of time. Why should you repeat 3 times?
Right. So, agreed. So any other question, any other discussion on those? And I 100% agree with you. We are 100% aligned that, and this is why I didn't spend that much time going through line by line 3 pages of Brother Chio's notes. After a week of doing that, how is this going to help my practice? And so I wanted to zoom in on how, and hopefully this, as you visit those places, these things become top of mind for you as well, or something similar to this. This is what they represent. This is the message. Not the details.
Experience. Do you think that we have to visit the privileged ones, learn it, and come back? No, at this stage, these things will become meaningful. For lay people, or for someone who go, they may be like a sign of your tourism. Second time. So
In
your view, how many times you have to go? How many times?
in my opinion,
Yeah.
if you go once with a really good guide
Yeah.
that talks, when visiting me talks about this kind of thing, doesn't get so caught up on all of those, the storyline. If your guide talks about these things, about these kinds of things,
Yeah.
that's good.
Do you have such times?
Yes. Okay. Yes, there are such guides. Yes.
They can recommend us.
Chan Kun Sang was my guide. All right. Now he mixed. He took a lot of stuff, but this definitely came through. All right. He was the one. He was the guy on mine. My wife also went with Brother Tom to the fourth place. He was a very good guide. So somebody who is going to tell you the story, tell you some of those stories as background, but really put through this is a very important aspect. Okay. The next chapter in Brother Joe's book. Yes. Yes.
Adding on to Galileo question, right? Going forward, I mean, just thinking out the box, right? Let's say you happen to go again, you'll be happy to tag on you.
What's our approach, saying that the next trip, that's not even nice to go. Who can? Do you conduct tours?
It will be a bit
You sing the sadhana, for sadhana.
Hopefully the next time, if you do have an opportunity to go, watch this video before you go. It'll at least prepare you a little bit. So whoever your guide is, and often the guide will be a monk, or we'll have monks with them, right? And so the monk, a proper monk, will not be talking about all the devas and that kind of stuff. They will be talking about this kind of thing. Okay, if they can, relating to lay people. So.
One fine day, we decided to do by
Okay, so this is the next section of Brother Joe's notes. At the time of the Buddha, they didn't talk about the Digha Nikaya, the Majjhima Nikaya, Samkhya Nikaya, Madhyamaka Nikaya, Guddika Nikaya. They didn't talk about that stuff. The Buddha talked about his teachings in these 9 different categories. Okay, so sutta, he did talk about suttas. These are speeches the Buddha made. Actually, in my slides here, I got a little bit academic. I will put them up, but I'm not going to go through them. I'm just going to put them up here so that if you want to look at them again, you can. Go through a little bit of analysis of each of them, because it's not really going to change your practice. I just want to it's not really going to change your practice. There are suttas. They were good because they have a lot of stock passages, and the opening Evame Sutta, which is, thus have I heard. Okay? Thus may I Sutta heard. They all start out with that. Many of the suttas start with that because it was what Ananda said at the first council, according to the tradition, according to the Vinaya, Ananda, the first council, with his fantastic tape recording memory, started each sutta. This I heard, meaning the Buddha had recited everything to him. If Ananda was not present, the Buddha shared it with Ananda, and so Ananda became like the repository and shared all the suttas in the texts using this format. Mixed prose and verse. This has a prose, a story, and then a verse at the end. This is like a punchline that reinforces the teaching. You'll find them in certain Nikayas. You will find verses passages with a prose section, the story, and then usually in like a poetry, and if you read it in Pali, it's got a rhythm to it. The number of syllables is all very fixed. Then there is this powerful verse at the end, which is like a punchline. Helps for memorization. The exposition, this is more when the Buddha got into very detailed technical analysis. It's almost like the Abhidhamma, early Abhidhamma. So listing of sense bases, of factors of awakening. So those are handbooks for monks to drill in the doctrinal classifications. Gatha, the verses, these are short, pithy reflections, like in the Dhammapada, right? We keep remembering the Dhammapada verses because they're short, easy to remember. So easy repetition and reflection. That's another type of teaching that the Buddha did. Udana, inspired utterance. When the Buddha made a very inspired statement at the end, or exaltation, inspired cry, capturing the emotional high point of the insight. So, for example, when the Buddha told the story of his enlightenment, he gave out this cry of joy, saying, I have seen, tent maker, I have seen you. I have seen what you've done, and the tent pole is broken. I have broken all of your illusion, as a very inspired message. Iti.practising, thus was said, actually, there was a story of a maid, actually. Okay, so Shaka was a you might call her a noble lady. She had a maid, Yudhara, and Shaka would send this maid to listen to the Buddha's talks and repeat back what she heard. So the maid would go listen and repeat back, saying, Iti.practising, this blessed one said. So repeating back all the messages. So it feels like just like a standalone. It's more than the Dhammapada verse. It's a longer message, but each one is like a standalone gem. Recitation. The Jataka, we've talked about those, right? All those birth stories in previous births, countless murals, folk recitations, South Asia, Southeast Asia. I mean, you take a look at the earliest Buddhist sculptures. It's a lot of Jataka tales illustrated on them, either in the sculpture or in the painting. The caves, they often have the Jataka tales because, as you say, it's inspiring and good for storytelling. These accounts of marvels, the Abhidhamma, those are the ones where he talks about the miraculous, the Deva stories, the 7 steps, that part of, all those kinds of things, those miraculous stuff. To me, those are just marketing. That's you use the word marketing. I agree with you. These are the marketing ones. Okay.
So I think it's a big culture in the sense that on the record, they like to exaggerate. That to magnify, not exaggerate from word, tend to magnify events.
Marketing is not just an Indian thing. In the good old days too. I mean, you had the Greek gods, right? The heroic epics and so on. A lot of marketing in there. Abhidhamma, brother, the questions and answers. This is a great way of sharing things. Now, this 9 ways was an archaic mnemonic mentioned in the sutras and early Sinhalese chronicles, the Dikvansa Mahavamsa. It's okay, I won't talk about the Dikvansa Mahavamsa, they're interesting books, but it's how the Buddha's teachings were recited. But it's by the 3rd council, the 5 Nikayas had already been established orally. And by the 4th council, when things were written down, the 5 Nikaya structure entirely superseded the Navanga scheme. So nobody uses this 9 ways, except that's what's listed in the sutras. These days, they talk about the Digha Nikaya, Majjhima Nikaya, Samyutta Nikaya, Vittaka Nikaya, and the Khuddaka Nikaya. That's how we organize the Buddhist teachings today. Ever since the 3rd council, that's been the way of organizing. Before the 3rd council, it was more around those 9 different methods I mentioned earlier.
So now, as you say, whatever we have in now is for the third and the fourth council, fourth.
Okay, this is a way of organizing them.
But now, is there any research that people actually look at the council before that of the teaching? And is there any discrepancy, or we just assume that we take it, okay, this is the one that we organize, we accept it?
Okay, what we've got is there's some interesting things where the first real written records in India were done by Ashoka. Okay? And there are a few times in his pillars and his rock edicts where he references the teachings of the Buddha. Okay? And most, but not all, can be traced back to what we've got today. Most, but not all. In other words, the Ashoka carved into a rock at the time of the Third Council. The Buddha said X, Y, Z. Most of the time, it can be traced back, but not always. Sometimes, so that there is definite archaeological proof that there's stuff that's been missing since the Third Council to today. I mean, this is 2,300 years ago, right? But even before that,
Yeah, before Ashoka, now like
Okay.
Afghanistan, Gandhara.
exactly. Now, what has happened is it is an active area of research about how things evolved, because the teachings were brought through Afghanistan, Pakistan, through the Silk Road into China. And some of those teachings have been recovered through, they've uncovered clay pottery and so on, where stuff has been inscribed. And there's been analysis done, quite a bit of analysis done, comparing to modern, or what we currently do. Okay? And in fact, there is a very comprehensive study done by Bhikkhu Analayo, where he takes every sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya and said, okay, let's talk about the first sutta of the Majjhima Nikaya. He just used that as a convenient structure. He's a Theravada monk, German Theravada monk. Let's take a look at MM1, the first sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya. Here is the list of everything that we have found that's a parallel to this, what was in that sutta from Gandhara, in the Pakistan, from Afghanistan, from China, everything that was a parallel to this. And he compares and said, okay, likely this is what the original was like. This is more original, this is less original. All right, so he's not taking the hardline view of the Theravada is the absolute original. He is open to the possibility. In fact, he says quite clearly, in some cases, the Mahayana ones, the ones that were brought to China, the ones that were buried in jars in Pakistan and Afghanistan, are earlier than what we currently have. Because yes, we say that the Theravada version is the quote original, but it still evolved over time. What though they found, and to summarize, the message is the same. The marketing is different. All right. Yeah, I mean, some of the details are a little different, right? Sometimes the list is in a slightly different order than what we got it. Sometimes they add 1 or 2 items to the list. All right. One of the most famous ones, of course, is one of the most famous suttas. But most important to me is the Satipatthana Sutta. Right? Mahasatipatthana Sutta. The way in which the structure of the Mahasatipatthana Sutta, because that's the core of Vipassana practice, it's got a statement, a definition of here's how you practice, the definition section, and then it lists all these different types of objects. Here's the objects related to the body, here's the objects related to feeling, here's the objects related to consciousness, here's the objects related to dhammas or phenomena. Okay? What he found is all the different versions of this that they have found, the how you practice is the same. The message is the same. However, the list of objects are different. amended. Okay, so how you practice is the same. All virtually identical words. How you practice is the same. However, different traditions, different versions have different lists of objects. And even in our Theravada tradition, what we have right now, the Satipatthana Sutta, there's two versions, right? There's the short version in the Majjhima Nikaya, the long version in the Digha Nikaya. What's the difference? Well, they're verbatim identical, except when it comes to one object, the Four Noble Truths. In the short version, the Majjhima Nikaya, it takes it in one paragraph, describes the Four Noble Truths in one paragraph. In the Digha Nikaya, everything is identical, except that one paragraph gets expanded into 3 pages. So you ask yourself, and I asked a meditation teacher, a Sayadaw with a PhD from the U.S. University, I asked him, how do we know? Why are there 2 different ones? And he said, different Bhāvanā, different reciters, they pass down slightly different versions. And when you look at other traditions, none of the other traditions even include the Four Noble Truths as an object of meditation. How you meditate is the same, but the list of objects is slightly different. So to me, how I practice is the same. That's the important message, how I practice. What objects I choose to meditate on, not so important. I have to meditate on this object, that object. Mahasi puts a huge amount of focus on the rising and falling, lifting, pushing, all the 4 elements, right? He puts a huge focus on that. Other teachers may put focus elsewhere. That's fine. How you practice is the same. So the stuff that got changed over the century, over the millennia, relate to the marketing, the stuff around the edges. The core message, same. Product is the same. So today we use the 5 Nikaya structure. Actually, if you read the Vinaya, it talks about, even from the first council, it talks about breaking into the 4 Vinayas. Doesn't mention the Khuddaka Nikaya. It mentions the 4. Doesn't mention the Abhidhamma. It just says there's 4 Nikayas. But when was that written? It wasn't finalized until the 3rd council, even though it was talked about the 1st council. So this is the Theravada view of what happened in the 1st council. There are other traditions, each with their own Vinaya, that have different stories about what happened in the 1st council. In fact, reading an analysis of the different Vinayas, there's so much variation about what happened in the 1st council. Many scholars say, well, maybe there was no 1st council. 2nd council, all the different traditions agree on where the sources of disagreement were and schism and what happened. So 2nd council, yes, that probably was a historical event. But the 1st council may not have been, because everybody's got a different version of what happened. Does it matter? Does it matter to my practice? No. What matters is the message at the core. I wouldn't even say the product is identical. The core of the product is identical, right?
The raw materials.
Yeah, the raw materials. That's an excellent way of saying it. Yeah, the core of the materials is the same. But a lot of the peripheral stuff.
Of course, the most original that you understand Pali, a lot of translation in English. Why do we use words that an easy English word will explain in many cases? Is it because of a lot of these English words that they use, which you look at the dictionary, every time you read the translation, you go for a dictionary, then you say, oh, this is a simpler word.
Okay, where did it come from?
Yeah.
First of all, the first translations of all this Pali. Now, let's just assume that Pali hasn't changed too much without it. Right? When it was first translated into English, was by a bunch of British scholars about 150 years ago, 1880s, 1890s. Okay? And they spoke as professors would speak in the 1880s. All right? They used a style of English, of academic English from the 1880s, 1890s. Okay? And so English is my first language. I find it hard to read, right? It wasn't until about 35, 40 years ago when started with Maurice Walsh, but then Bhikkhu Bodhi translated even more contemporary English, but still kept the original messages tied back to the commentary. Okay, so the most accessible English, and even think about it, quite frankly, he was a American trained PhD. If you read his earliest books that he wrote, it's PhD English. It's really very difficult. As he started doing more and more translation, doing more and writing more and more, it got easier. His English became easier and easier and easier to understand. So if you read his very first, I mean, the problem is that who did the translation? Was it a PhD, or was it somebody who could give you the proper essence? But even giving the proper essence, many of these Pali terms, there is no simple English word for it. You've got to take into account. I mean, a simple word like virya, right? Translated as energy. Right? Virya, energy. However, in Pali, virya has the same root as hero. So when you say virya in Pali, it implies a heroic effort, okay? Which you don't necessarily get when you hear the word energy or effort. You don't get that power behind it of hero. So how do you translate virya? Of course, energy is a good translation, a simple to understand translation, but it doesn't capture the full breadth. And so typically for the important Pali words, I've got a list of 4 or 5 equivalent or translate 4 or 5 words that you have to combine all of them in English to really capture the essence. Courageous effort, enduring, virya. You may have what you really want to have in effort is the sense of long enduring, like a marathon runner rather than like a sprinter. That type of effort is what's critical and like or heroic. A hero doesn't just go for one moment and die. No, a hero is long term. So energy, the simple word energy, is just the beginning. Okay, it's simple. I mean, so this is a challenge. Okay, we're already a little bit over. So any questions from the people online?